Welcome to Tech Takeaways, the podcast taking technology's biggest challenges and dicing them up into little bite-sized chunks just for you to enjoy. This week's episode, we are looking at building a cloud-native business. As always, I'm your host, Jason Fitzgerald. Welcome to the show. And we have Paul Stringfellow co-hosting. And this week, we say welcome to Kirk Ryan as our special guest. Welcome.
Thanks.
Hi, Kirk.
Hi. Yeah. So Kirk has got experience with building a cloud business from the ground up, and so we thought it would be great to have you on the show. So, yeah, welcome to the show.
Thanks, and yeah, very happy to share the more stories of everything to do with cloud native and building it.
Yeah, good stuff. So, could you give the listeners a bit of an intro to yourself?
Yeah, sure. So for the last few years, I've run my own startup, which was naturally built entirely in the cloud.
Okay.
So, everything all the decisions that went behind that, how to build it, how, as a naturally sort of more technology-focused founder, how to deal with also balancing the business aspects of that as well.
Okay.
And also just the realization of not necessarily the reality being what the PowerPoint told you. And navigating that, yeah.
What? No, I don't believe that.
Yeah. So
Yeah, and I think it's a really interesting topic and something we wanted to do for quite a while because I think we talked to lots of organisations, and I know you've kind of talked about your most recent experience, but obviously you've got quite a long experience in the industry working with more traditional non-cloud native businesses. You've been through building your own cloud native business as well. Yeah, but I think we see quite a lot, don't we? And we have a lot of conversations with people who are looking at adopting the cloud, who are looking at how they transform the way they operate today to take advantage of what cloud brings. So we thought it'd be useful to speak to somebody who's done both worked the traditional world and has done this kind of building the new cloud and try and impart some of Kirk's wisdom to the world about the things
exactly.
that you should look out for.
I mean, the way I look at this is like this: if I was starting a business today, I wouldn't be going out and buying servers. I wouldn't be buying infrastructure. That's the way that it was done 10, 15 years ago. Let's get some big investment in. We're going to need to build these systems to be able to scale. Depending on what it is. Let's take an online shop, for example. You're hosting your own online shop. You've got data center, you've got rack space, you've got heating, you've got cooling, you've got the physical hardware. Would I architect it like that now? No. I'd use the cloud and I'd take a pay per month model or something like that. So the reality, I think, with this is that businesses being formed today, and certainly being formed over the last 2 years, it's the obvious way in to building up an infrastructure to support the business.
yeah.
So where do you start?
Well, I mean, to that point there, I think the reason you'd answer that question in terms of why wouldn't you do that today is agility, right? So the very first thing you need when you're starting out is you need to go fast. You need to test things. You need to see if your theories, and a lot of them are theories at that point, actually stand up to the test.
Yeah.
Can the way you're thinking about this application or service or set of APIs that you're developing, can you iterate on those very quickly? Can you get things up and running? Can you bring people that can manage and develop those things quickly? Right. Whereas, to refer to the old way of doing things, you would have had to potentially go to a vendor or a partner, asked for a PO, gone through 3 quotes. And by the time 4, 6, 8 weeks later, the kit's actually turned up, you've lost 2 weeks of productivity from the off.
But you may not have the money to do it in the first place.
Exactly. Yeah. Now, that's not to say, though, that having been in cloud native, it doesn't necessarily mean everything stays in the cloud. A lot said about cloud repatriation and bringing data back and things, but that's natural because the second aspect of where cloud native really excels is there's a lot of unknown unknowns when you're starting out. So there's some stuff you don't know, and there's some stuff you're yet to find out about your journey.
Okay.
Yeah. And where the cloud is fantastic is being able to scale up, scale down, micro experiments very quickly and answer those questions as fast as possible, versus the old thing may have been, we'll buy 10 servers from X vendor to find out you only needed 1. Or the worst case, you buy 1, you've waited a few weeks for it to turn up and you needed 10.
So because that all makes sense from kind of a startup perspective, but if you're an established business, so you've already got some infrastructure, is that advice any different? And have you any thoughts on where's a good place to start if you're doing that?
Yeah, I mean, is it different if you've got resource available and you know how to use it and it's fast? Like you haven't wrapped the process around it of having to do a cab change, get it through approvals, all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
It's still probably more politically and procedurally correct to go with the cloud, because, you know, the risk of still saying, hey, you know, that line on a cab where it says, what could the potential impact be to the other shared services on this box? The answer is going to be, I don't know. And that's not really going to be acceptable. Whereas in the cloud, you've isolated it to its own environment. And the worst case is, well, it runs slowly or breaks in its own environment, right? And of course, you may have investments in some on-prem hyperscaler that's QoS and all the other things. But again, you start to feel, okay, we're getting quite process-driven here. We need to move fast. We need to do things there. I think what I've observed in the larger organizations is there is more of an emerging culture of these micro experiments of projects being more mini startups in themselves, giving them their own environment, areas, the way they're funded as well internally. You're starting to see a culture of people are having to go up the chain and say, hey, listen, here's the project, and almost as if they were pitching for VC money in a way. So there's not too much difference in terms of those projects, because you have to frame it, understand the business case, and really understand back to probably the most critical thing is, what is the business need or requirement I'm trying to address here?
Yeah.
And quite frankly, for a lot of C-level execs, you know, when you look at what's going on, the technology is the toolkit, but you still have to have a destination where you're heading to. So will this make us go faster? Will this make us sell more? Will it allow us to compete at a lower cost? If it's neither of those three things, already it's like, right, okay, how is my CFO going to respond to this? And a lot more of the decisions these days are arriving at the CFO desk rather than the traditional CTO or just project manager. I think a lot more, especially the companies I've worked with over the last couple of years, given the change of, you know, 0% interest is gone. The funding has, you know, significant costs and interests on it now. The justification really has to be a very strong business unit economic sort of case now. So,
yeah, and I mean, I think there's lots of things kind of unpicking in what you've talked about, and we don't have time to unpick all of it. But a couple of things that really jumped out to me. I think one was that if you're an existing business looking to adopt kind of cloud-native technology, re-architect, transform the way you do business by using the cloud, you know, one of those things was absolutely have a culture that understands how the cloud works. So there's no point going to kind of your change process board that only meets once every 3 weeks to say, can we make some cloud changes? Because what's the point?
The proof of concept is done by that point, isn't it? It's done in 3 days.
You've rolled it out. You're on version 15. But I think the other thing as well was, you know, and I think that's so important with so many IT projects, is understand why you're doing what you're doing. Yeah. You know, I think we've all been there, haven't we, and kind of suffered from seeing projects ruled out because the technology seemed like a good idea and go, well, let's roll this tech out.
Yeah, that's
the business never knows why.
Yeah, it's kind of like, you know, the IT professionals like to play with things, you know, and understand them, and, you know, and it's a hobby to a lot of us as well, you know, so kind of playing with that technology to, for your own gains, essentially, you know, because you want to learn a technology or you're just curious to see how it works, is very different from it needs to have a defined business outcome. Yeah. And I think, you know, I mean, we've certainly seen systems like that, you know, where configurations have been built like that, the IT person's left, and then a business has said, oh, hang on a minute, how does this go together? You know, because the knowledge hasn't been shared internally. And I think when we're talking about cloud, I think it's important to talk about the team that you've got as well. I think, you know, it's important to kind of look at what the capabilities of that team, would you say?
Yeah, I mean, you know, once you pass that initial prototyping phase and potentially even starting to get your first sort of traction,
yeah,
you know, a lot of it turns into, right, we have to maintain this. We now have a roadmap, and it's almost a different personality type as well. You'll have people that are great at creating things from nothing and get into version 1.0 alpha, and it's good enough. It does 80% of what it's supposed to do and everything. But it's a personality shift of the person that then takes that and fills that final 20% of capability, knows how to maintain it, how to make sure that it's compliant with regulatory requirements, another skill set, does put process around it, because you start to mature as an organization where you can't just wildly change something and potentially break 10, 20, 100 thousands of customers down the line. You do start to put those controls in place. So for me, like the cloud native piece and the technology piece is, for me, more the natural, exciting part, because you get to see the Frankenstein's monster come to life in a way. Absolutely. But then somebody's got to feed it, keep it alive, all the rest.
So here's a question relating to that. I'm keen to get your thoughts on this. How important is the platform in that decision?
It's critical. I would say, you have to look at the industry and where you are and what sort of skills pool you want to hire from.
Yeah.
So, for example, if you're looking at UK hires, you've probably got more AWS folks than others. You've got emerging, like a lot of Microsoft folks there as well. It depends sort of what you're trying to use as well. Most engineers will quite happily look at GCP and say, wow, and from an engineering perspective, phenomenal.
Yeah.
From a development perspective, phenomenal. But if your organization is more, we do enterprise licensing, we need to wrap everything up in as big a license as possible, you'll probably end up with Microsoft, because that's where they excel.
And legacy platforms might be
exactly that, yeah. And before you know it, you've got Office 365, you've got all the rest. So a lot of it may even be out of your hands. You don't get to necessarily pick. I think the best company cultures that I've experienced myself will have all three. They'll not be in just one.
Okay. So I was going to ask you about that, because we talk about multi-cloud a lot as a concept. So I'm interested that actually you see that as a reality as well. And because that's a reality, how does that drive some of your design decisions for when you build an application, for example? Does that drive the way you build the application? Because while you've got multiple clouds, do you build that with the idea of portability between them as well?
Kind of, yeah, because data residency is part of it, but going higher than that, you have to look at the services that are offered. So, for example, let's give it some context. If I'm creating an app that's got mapping and telemetry and it's effectively IoT, you're probably not going to take mapping directly from, you're going to take it from a market leader like Google. If you're taking asynchronous database and caching and the fact that edge devices connect and disconnect all of the time, you need something that's robust with connectivity. And at the time when I was making that decision, AWS was a clear front runner when it came to database caching and keeping things up to date.
Okay.
And reducing data egress, because ingress is really easy to understand and it's free, so you don't worry about it. But you at one point want to show value back to your users, and that means taking data out of the cloud. So you've got hidden costs that you only really start to experience at scale when you move past we got up to 7.5 million users at the peak. And that's totally different to when you're just toying around and you're still in the free boundaries. You can't really see it yet, or it's, a few pennies. But then as soon as you start to scale up, you start to realize, actually, okay, some of the design architectural decisions, how do we minimize data transfer? How do we make sure it's safe? And then going back to the multi-cloud pieces, we talk about the big three when we speak about multi-cloud, and of course there's others. But the reality is there's more and more of this you starting to get as SaaS. So you're not even having the data, you're not owning the database in any of those cloud providers. And case in point would be the next generation modern sort of web frameworks. So let's take something like Next.js. If you were building a web service, SaaS service today, you now have this new concept of they'll own your database. They'll run your API service, and it's all in one code base. You're like, wow, so I don't need to worry about AWS IAM. I don't need to worry about doing a Postgres database in this provider. I don't need a DB, all these other bits. You start to think, I can really innovate at pace. But then it's learning now you're vendor locked in.
Yeah. I suppose with that, there's always this balance of ease of use or ease of consumption and cost and security with it, because you made a great example there. You can architect it yourself. You've got to be concerned about AWS access security. You've got to be concerned about whether your database is online. That's someone's job to do, or you can give that to someone else. But you've obviously got to pay a lot higher for that, aren't you?
Yeah. Okay. And just to add to that, just because I know we're kind of coming to the end of our time, but I'm interested in that piece about cost, because we talk about, we've done episodes around cloud cost optimization. How important, so if people think, we just talk about that because, it's a thing, but how important as somebody developing in that environment, running a business actually in that case for you, How important is that kind of observability around cost and being able to kind of predict cost and predict cost trend?
It's critical. So you're generally working on much tighter budgets as a sort of, pre-seed funded startup these days. You have to justify your expenditure a lot more, which means you track it. And the benefits of doing that really are you prevent runaway. So there were instances where, even 24 hours, you can destroy your entire budget if you get something wrong. Came very close to it once. Nice friendly call to the cloud provider saying, please, we didn't realize what we were doing. Can you refund us that before we go bankrupt? But really, it's like you should be catching these things sooner. And I think
they did that.
They did. Yeah. So they say, hey, listen, we work with startups all the time. We know there was nothing here. You've not, it was a misconfigured thing that got into a loop, basically. And
Right, okay.
so that then, I think sometimes it's like when you're selling security and things like that, sometimes you don't realize how much you need it until you've experienced the pain of that fire. And then you realize, right, this is now everything I'm going to do from this point forward in my career has this baked in. So you now know that, the impact that this can have on your business. And the next time that happens, if it happens, it's going to probably be a lot more severe.
Yeah, great. So as we're coming towards the end of the episode, we like to do a bit of a takeaway. Some key advice to someone that is looking to maybe build a cloud business. What would be your key takeaway if you could summarize?
So my key takeaway would be, before you get too far down the rabbit hole of the tech, and it might be quite hard to do if you're going cloud native and you are more technology focused, is to really clearly define the business needs and requirements and what is the challenge that you're trying to solve. Once you've got those, the technology decisions become a lot easier.
Yeah.
And also you become less prone to feature creep and the next new shiny thing, which become distraction because you have to get to value as fast as possible.
Feels like treat a cloud native business like you treat a business.
Like a business,
Yes.
Yeah.
Sounds like a good place to stop.
That's brilliant, great
On
advice.
that bombshell.
On that bombshell, that's the end of this week's episode. We hope you found it enjoyable. We're available everywhere you get your podcasts. So search for Tech Takeaways. We're in all of the podcast stores, and you can subscribe on YouTube below. So just hit the button down there. There'll be a new episode next week.